So I didn't really make a conscious decision to start on the 4th of April. I had a job lined up until the end of March, and then I got kind of medical clearance to go through hiking again, maybe the first week of March, something like that. And so I figured, as soon as possible after that, I would get out on the trail. So I booked a flight about 3 weeks out for the 1st of April. I left New Zealand on the 1st, arrived in Atlanta on the 2nd, and then I had an Airbnb booked for a couple of nights to just kind of sort myself out. I went to REI and Walmart and a few other things, and then I actually took a lift to Emekalola from Atlanta on the 4th. And I didn't really get there until, like 1:30 in the afternoon or something like that. And I set out then and started walking. So for me, it wasn't too much to do with the seasons. Like, I knew I didn't want to start in March just because it seemed too early, but also I couldn't have started then anyway because of medical stuff. And so then, it was just early April, and the first week of April was as good as any for flights, so I headed off then.
I ended up starting on April 4th, and the exact date wasn't chosen specifically, but I knew that I wanted to start sometime in either the end of March or up to mid-April. And I came to that decision in part because that's when the majority of people start. When I was first thinking about the trail, I was debating whether or not to go northbound or southbound. And that decision was because I ended up thinking that I wanted to be around the majority of people hiking the trail so that I could meet as many people as I could, fellow thru hikers, as opposed to going southbound where you only have about 1/10 of the population. And so that gave me a starting range. And given that I graduated in mid-February, that gave me about a month and a half after that to focus on getting in shape and doing the last gear tests before I started. And then when it came right down to the actual start date, I moved in with my parents mid-March because they were going to help me get to the start of the trail. And at that point, we were kind of just waiting for a good weather window. And so when I had first moved in with them, it rained down there in Georgia quite a bit the first week. But then by April 3rd, the weather looked like it was going to clear up for the next at least couple of days. So we headed down on the 3rd and got a hotel room right there at the start of the trail and ended up starting on the 4th.
So I've had a lot of people ask me when I say that I'm doing these thru hikes, are you heading off alone or are you with a group of people? And so all 3 thru hikes I've done, I've started out alone, and it really doesn't bother me. I've probably been hiking by myself, I don't know, for a long time, maybe mid-2014. I did my first solo hikes, and then kind of built on that more and more. But the other thing, especially about the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, is that even if you start alone, you're not going to be alone on trail. The Appalachian Trail is a really busy trail, so setting off on a solo hike, there's lots of people around, and I was sure that I would make some friends pretty quickly and be able to hike around people even if I wasn't hiking with people, and that absolutely proved to be the case.
People are often surprised when you tell them that you plan to hike the entire Appalachian Trail solo, or that you even plan to start out solo. And I was asked by numerous people at the beginning who was going with me or if I was taking a friend along or anything like that. And in all the years that I've been thinking about the Appalachian Trail, I've always planned on doing it by myself. One of the major reasons that I planned to do it myself or by myself rather than taking somebody with me is that it was sort of my idea to do it. And if I was going to somebody else to ask them to do it with me, it would almost be like bringing my goal or my challenge to them and pulling them into it. And whereas I would be 100% committed I guess I didn't feel like I could get anybody else to be that level of committed if it wasn't their idea to begin with. And the Appalachian Trail is so populated, especially going northbound, starting in March or April and being in that bubble. I mean, there was no possibility that I would be by myself in that sense. I knew that going into it, that I'd very unlikely be alone very many nights on the trail at all. But I knew that if I met people on the trail after I had started, that they would have started of their own volition and would have been 100% dedicated to it the same way that I was, at least in the beginning. They wouldn't, whereas I might have had to talk a friend into it or something like that. I've also read quite a bit about relationships really being challenged on the trail, like bringing a partner along, for example, or a friend. And then you feel like you're forced into being with that person at all times through all kinds of challenges and everything. And if they're not going into it as dedicated to overcoming all the challenges and everything as you are, then that sets up another hurdle in the way of finishing.
So as soon as I got off the Pacific Crest Trail, I was pretty certain that I wanted to do another thru hike. For me, even though I was having medical issues, in the Black Friday sales at the end of 2018, I actually bought the gut hook maps for both the CDT and the AT. And I wasn't planning anything at that stage. They were on sale and I bought both. And then more and more time passed and the North American hiking season was getting closer and I didn't have medical clearance yet. And it became pretty clear that I wasn't going to be able to walk the CDT because I wasn't going to have the time to plan it. And it does have a lot more logistical issues with food and water and weather when compared to the AT. And so when I got medical clearance about 3 weeks before I started, the AT was the obvious choice because I could fly to the States without knowing pretty much anything about the trail, pack enough food for the first resupply, and then just get on trail. I didn't have to worry about snow or bear canisters or anything really. I could just start walking, and so that was why I chose the AT.
I've been talking about hiking the Appalachian Trail on and off since I was about 10 years old, probably, give or take a few years. When I was that age and, younger and older than that, my family and I took several vacations down to Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains in Gatlinburg. And we would hike up into the mountains or go up to Newfound Gap. And sometime around 10 years old, I saw a sign on the Appalachian Trail with a mile marker to Maine. And it was so far. And that was the first time that I conceptualized the idea of such a long trail. To me, prior to that, hiking trails were day hikes that, were at most maybe 10 miles or something, which is like the waterfall hike out and back that my family and I had been doing up to that point. My experience with camping was car camping, and still was for quite a while after that time. But that's when the spark was first formed, I guess, was around that time. And I've been talking about it off and on in the decades since.
So I never really did any specific AT training. Once I got home from the PCT, I was back in New Zealand. I was only working 3 days a week. I worked Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then I had Friday through Monday off every weekend. And so I would go away hiking every single weekend, trying to do a 3 or 4 day trip. I explored a lot of the North Island of New Zealand, some of which I'd seen before, some of which I hadn't. And I would just get out there and go hiking. So although I wasn't specifically training for the trail, I was just out on the trail as much as possible. And I was definitely pushing bigger miles that summer than I had in New Zealand before, but it was kind of a carry-on from pushing bigger miles on the PCT and wanting to do another thru hike. So being able to keep, the bigger miles up on harder terrain.
I started training in earnest for the trail about 2 months prior to starting. So just as I was finishing up my dissertation defense. And I had been rock climbing for quite a while prior to this. So it's not like I went from the couch to the trail by any means. And I had been running as well. But then about 2 months prior, I decided, okay, this is really happening. And I want to target these muscle groups and make sure that I'm in shape prior to getting on the trail so that I sort of skip that initial period of aches and pains that almost everybody has. And I had still, but I definitely reduced that, I think. So I got a gym membership, and my buddy Nish and I went to the gym several times a week together, and I, with his help, put together a routine that targeted calves in particular and ankle strength, and then just everything from legs to core, traps to help strengthen my pack carrying muscles, just to kind of give some padding there because I'm pretty skinny, and the pack can kind of ride on my bones there, so I tried to build that up a little bit. And the Stairmaster, I think probably more than anything, the Stairmaster was a huge help because the AT has so much elevation compared to a lot of the other long trails. And so the muscles that got the most sore on the trail, even though I had trained for it, were those climbing muscles and the calves and the ankle stabilizing muscles. So I'm very glad that I put some time into training those muscles in particular prior to getting on the trail. And if anything, I would say probably I should have started sooner doing that. I don't think there's any way to completely avoid the aches and pains of getting used to long trail hiking every single day consecutively, but it certainly had to have helped. And I also did some training hiking, because really that's the best way to train for a hike, is to hike. So I did both solo and group hiking in the winter, sort of last minute gear testing, and marathon or near marathon day backpacking trips prior to starting in that 2-month window. There's a lot of back and forth on whether or not you should train at all, whether it matters. I am solidly in the camp of training has to be beneficial. That going cold turkey from the couch to the trail is always going to be worse than training for something. I don't imagine there'd be any other physical activity where people would go from doing no training at all to the pinnacle of their sport like that without any training. I think that'd be insane. But for some reason, with thru hiking, it's a really common trend to just go out and do it. There are so many people that have no experience prior, and they just wing it, sort of. And that's one kind of adventure, and more power to them if that's the kind of adventure they want.
I didn't really have a set goal of how long I wanted the trail to take. I knew that with the winter coming, I wanted to be off the trail by the start of October. So, end of September was kind of a hard deadline for me to finish the trail. And then pretty quickly after I started hiking, I decided that probably before the start of October, I'd be able to get over to the PCT and finish off the section of trail that I couldn't finish off last season. And so then it just kind of became, I've got 2 weeks of hiking to do over in Washington, so maybe I can be finished by early September, then I'll have time to go over and do that. But once again, it wasn't really a hard deadline or a set goal. It was more just keep walking in and see what happens.
I did a lot of reading prior to starting the trail of other people's accounts and any kind of statistics that I could get a hold of and things like that to kind of estimate how long it would take and how much it would cost and all these sorts of things. And my estimate with how long it would take ended up being pretty accurate. I figured it would take me about 4.5 months. I thought that if it were easier than I expected, it might be closer to 4. But I had enough time that 5.5 months would have been okay if I needed to take that long. And we ended up being just over that 4.5 mark. So
I definitely think that the 4.5 months that it ended up taking us was quicker than I anticipated. But also, if I look back at it, we weren't moving that quickly. So I think just in my head, it shows how much I really didn't have a plan.